Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Cloak Podcast. Today's guest is Andy Ellis, who is a partner of Wild Ventures. He is a renowned author. He is also a Hall of Fame for the CSO, a substantial contributor to our industry, and in my opinion, a true legend. And I was saying this to Andy before we hit record that, yeah, it's good to see you again, Andy. Obviously, we last spoke a couple of years ago when you were working with Orca and I was with
Yep.
Flow Health. And yeah, obviously I've kept up with what you've been doing in the industry, obviously some movement as well, and we can dig into that. But yes, how are you, Andy? You okay?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Leo. And as I said, I always love when other people call me a legend because I'd rather be a legend in other people's minds than in my own.
Absolutely. And also, you know, feel free to obviously plug your recent book, 1% Leadership. Obviously, any links, blogs, newsletters, anything you want to, because as I said, you're a major contributor to our industry, and I think your voice is very, very relevant, more so than ever. And I think people just want to learn. And obviously,
Yeah,
this whole podcast is centered around people moving into the industry and also the challenges that we face with. So yeah, we'll kick on. We'll
great.
start with yeah, give me a brief overview of who you are, Andy, and your career as well. Yeah.
Yeah, so I stumbled into security, which is always fun to talk about. I was in the Air Force ROTC, here in the States. That's sort of the cadet training program while you're in college, and I wanted to be a battle planner. It actually was my dream. Was I wanted to be one of those guys who's helping conduct air battles. I didn't have the vision to actually be a pilot. And the summer before my senior year, I was at this program where you basically get to shadow an officer. I got to actually shadow F-16 pilots. So I was backseating in F-16s in
Wow.
Arizona. It was amazing. Fastest way possible to lose your lunch is in the backseat of an F-16. And I get this phone call from a major in South Carolina, and he's like, "Oh yeah, we're interested in you coming to work for us." And I'm like, "This is weird. You don't get interviews in the military like this. They just like the personnel office assigns you." And the Air Force had just stood up their information warfare program outside of Intel in an operational unit, and they'd said, "Oh, we want every graduating computer science major from MIT." That was me that year. So that's sort of how I got my start in security. And I always love going back to that moment because it sort of shows you how sometimes an opportunity just sort of lands in your lap that you had no control over. And I could have just done that for a little bit and then pivoted away, but I really found a place that I love. So I did that, went to Akamai where I was there for 20 years. And now I'm having a lot of fun dabbling in the startup world. Both I was doing a little bit of work with one of our portfolio companies, Orca as their advisory CISO. Now I'm pretty much full time here at YL as a partner. But I do have a little consulting business on the side doing leadership training because that's big thing I really am excited to do, which is how do we take leadership lessons and get them to people before their authorities, which is often where I think a lot of companies go wrong is they say, "Oh, look, you're a vice president, let's send you to leadership training." It's probably a little too late at that point to fix their leadership mistakes.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think that's yeah, that's I guess the best approach is obviously getting in there before people don't have the ability to recognize things like emotional intelligence, strategy, and everything else. You'd mentioned 20 years in one
Yep.
company. It's funny, right? I think in cyber we either job hop quite a bit because of maybe cultural elements, and it must have been good if you'd lasted 20 years, and talk me through how you kind of built resilience within those
Yeah.
20 years within that role. Yeah.
I mean, it was amazing. It wasn't one role, first of all. I came in, I was a senior security engineer. They were literally like, well, we have customers who are asking us to make sure that our platform is secure. Maybe we should hire somebody to do that. So my first job was just like, how do you just harden Linux on what was at the time 2,000 deployed servers? Akamai is now pushing closer and closer to 1 million. So that time I had that tiny number. And I arrived and I was still setting up my laptop when my boss walks over and he says, "By the way, next week, our British Standard 7799 auditors are coming in." And I'm like, "What are you talking about? This was not mentioned in my interview, not mentioned as part of my job description." He's like, "Yeah, we made a promise to Symantec a year ago that we would, do a BS 7799 assessment. For those of you who are young, BS 7799 is what becomes ISO 17799 and then ISO 27001 and 27002. So we were doing it, two iterations of names, let alone versions ago. And so I literally had to learn how to do compliance my first week on the job, and I'm running an auditor, and then I have to deliver these results to a customer who's obviously grumpy, like, why did you hire this auditor? They don't have a name. I'm like, I didn't hire them. I literally started a month ago at this point. So it's sort of this fascinating, every day the job changed. I would come in and I had a plan. That's not what I would do that day. So I moved on, became chief security architect, then chief security officer. Many years later, I owned the security team. At some point when we were doing layoffs, they're like, well, my boss left. There were 6 of us who worked in security, all directly for the vice president of operations. And he was like, well, I'm leaving. Andy, you're in charge of this team. And I'm like, okay, great. He said, oh, and by the way, we're doing a layoff next week, so you have to lay off half of your team too.
Wow.
So that was my first thing. So resilience is sometimes just accepting that the ground is going to shift underneath your feet. That's part of the job. It's actually is a chapter in my book, and I'm going to probably say this a lot today. It's a chapter in my book. My book is all about having chapters rather than a whole book to talk about a topic. You get 750 words to explain a problem or an approach. And the skill here is simple. Serenity is accepting that the shit you're wading through is shit you chose to wade through. Right? In tech, especially in security and tech, we get paid a lot of money. By comparison to other things we could be doing, like this is a job that is well compensated and that comes with a lot of stress. You just accept it. Like every day you should say, if you're feeling stressed, you should say, I could quit today. Do I want to? And if you say no, then you have chosen to cope with the stress.
I don't think anyone has ever been that honest on the podcast yet. And yeah, it definitely rings like a bell, definitely. And do you think that that acceptance is a thing that has led to burnout for some people, or do you think they don't know how to really kind of cope with that acceptance?
I think the burnout often comes from the lack of that acceptance,
Okay.
right? Let's just imagine that you are in a swamp, but you're on a little hill in a swamp. Like you're up out of the muck. You could stay up on that hill, and you're going to be fine. Like there's no muck inside your boots. You're not you're wet, whatever. But you can see an amazing 4-star resort with a spa like 4 miles away, but you're going to have to wade through 4 miles of swamp to get there.
Right.
Now, at the moment you step in, you get muck into your boots, it starts squelching, your thighs are going to get raw because you're rubbing it, like it's going to be miserable. And now you have 2 choices. You can focus on this misery that you're in, and be like, why am I doing this? What's going on? You forget about where you're headed. Right. And your burnout becomes like after 2 miles, like, can I just stop? Except if you stop at this point, now you're muck filled and not making any goals. But if you stay focused, it's like, yep, this is awful. I get that this is awful, but I've got a goal. I know where I'm headed. Like you have this level of serenity that protects you against the burnout. Protect your own energy. It's the best asset that you have. And if you are wasting your energy complaining about things that you have chosen not to change, then you're just wasting the energy. Either change them because that's your goal, or accept that that's not worth your energy right now.
I absolutely love that. Almost like when I was hearing that, I was thinking it's because we lose direction. We lose sight of that direction.
Yep.
And in order to get over the hill or through the muck or whatever it may be, that kind of that perseverance and yeah, I mean, obviously there'll be many anecdotes, there'll be many references for the book, and rightfully so because it's excellent. So we'll obviously plug this when the episode drops later on in the year. And one thing I wanted to ask you, Andy, I hope you don't mind, is like, how does a CSO move into like the kind of venture capital world? Or like, obviously you're at
Yep.
YL, and how do you then become a partner? Like, how does that work? Yeah.
Yeah. So I get asked this question a lot because a lot of CISOs
Sorry.
are no. It's I love the question. I had not realized until after I stopped being a CISO, how many people want to stop being CISOs. Like, it is a very stressful job. And, once you've been compensated well enough, a lot of people are like, well, what can I do that, will still be well compensated, but doesn't carry the same stress? So I actually started while I was at Akamai doing advising to companies. And here's the thing that I will tell you, which is I know a lot of CISOs who are like, oh, I want to advise companies, and how do I get compensated? You don't advise companies for the compensation. You advise them so that you can learn if you're good at giving them advice. For a lot of the companies that I advised independently, I did some through Weil and some independently. For all the independent ones, I have not seen a penny. I have equity in like 15 companies from independent consulting. Not a single one of them has ever paid me a cent. No exits. Now, none of them have failed, so at least my advice wasn't, crippling to them. So I'm optimistic someday. But I joined Weil's advisor program. I was one of the very first venture advisors. And it's actually fascinating because we have this program, and a lot of people think, oh, you have an advisor program so that you compensate people so they'll buy your products. And we actually find the opposite is true. People in our advisor program are often less likely to buy our products, but they're more likely to give great advice such that their peers might buy our products.
Yeah.
In fact, Akamai has now bought several products from companies in our portfolio that we didn't do when I was there because of the conflict of interest.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but I gave insights on how to build the right technology. Now those are being used. It's fantastic. So first of all, get started to decide if this is what you might want long before you're going to think about making a move. Now, I made the move in steps. I moved as an operating partner, which is a much more tactical role. I'm doing advice into companies, embedded in some of them, sort of at different levels. But over time, I wanted to do more and more. So I took a couple of board seats, and I sit on 5 of our boards, doing a little more executive management in the fund. So, it became natural to just say, hey, let's just move this to partner. So just a normal promotion of, I think I'm doing the operating partner piece of it well, which is like half of the partner role. Now I'm doing the other half of it. And part of it was I wanted to have sort of that stable base for one of the projects I'm working on right now that might launch by the time this podcast drops. So I'll tease it, even if it doesn't launch. It's going to be called How to CISO. And the idea is sort of the collected knowledge of advice and guidance to CISOs. You may recall while I was at Orca, I wrote the How to CISO Your First 91-Day Guide, 13,000 words, which in my opinion, anybody who changes jobs, whether you're a CISO or not, it is valuable to think about what is this new company I'm in? Who are my partners? How do I gather information quickly? Because I've got 91 days to succeed or not.
Yeah.
And I want to expand on that. I've got 3 more of those in the works. One which is sort of the idealized CISO job description, so that you can understand what expectations other people might have on you because they think the CISO job is different than what you think it is. And
This
that
is
mismatch is stress.
it's so overdue. And also, I think on the CSOandy.com website that you've got, I think I saw references to that kind of 90-day window. And I'm super excited about this because that's a really good context layer that maybe CISOs don't have, and also people that are maybe hiring a CISO. I think it's about aligning those expectations. And yeah, please, sorry, I interrupted you. Please continue.
No,
Yeah.
I'm always glad to hear that excitement. And then another one, which actually is mostly written, but ties into the talk I did at RSA this year, which was You Can't Measure Risk. Which a lot of people, some people loved, some people hated. But the basic model is that risk measurement is a red herring.
Yeah.
Right? The goal is to communicate risk, to use risk to either compare what you're doing, to change what you're doing. The measurement itself is not what's interesting, and the measurement is always going to be imperfect. And there's so many people who get so focused on measuring risk that becomes their end goal. Like they're like, oh, I get metriced on how much risk I can measure. And I'm like, but that's not success. Success is how much risk you mitigate. How do you help the company make wiser risk choices? So sort of a guidebook of what are the goals, and then what are all the different ways people measure and score risk, so you can figure out where they're useful and where they're not.
Nice. And then you said that may drop this year,
Yeah,
towards
so
the end of the year?
I'm hoping to get to launch it by the end of this year. Have a little microsite set up. Here's all the places, possibly start a podcast, interviewing CISOs to get their practical advice as well. And
Nice,
the goal
nice.
is for people who want to become a CISO, so you can start to learn before, for people who are CISOs to give them quick references, because people expect CISOs to be perfect. You should know everything, be a subject matter expert on everything. And we don't have enough good, quick reference guides for CISOs to just refer to.
Yeah, and also I think it's about setting realistic expectations. I had someone on the pod, Greg Vandergast, and he spoke about being let go a
Yep.
couple of times. And for me, like that's the first time I heard a CISO or CSO talk about being well, effectively let go from a role and or terminated or
Yep.
redundant or whatever you want to look at it. And I was like, wow, this is the first time I've heard someone actually speak about this in public because it's a taboo. People take it very personal. If
Yep.
it doesn't work out, most of the time it's not our fault. So, but yeah, really interesting. And yeah, yeah. I mean, we could go on a tangent about this, but I really look forward to it. And then hopefully by the time this goes live, we can add those links as well,
Yep.
and get that more of our profile. But let's talk about something that might be keeping you awake at night: cybersecurity. According to Vanta's latest State of Trust report, it's the number one concern for UK businesses. That's where Vanta comes in. Whether you're a startup, growing fast, or already established, Vanta can help you get ISO 27001 certified and more without the headaches. Vanta allows your company to centralize security workflows, complete questionnaires up to 5 times faster, and proactively manage vendor risks to help your team not only get compliant, but stay compliant. Stop stressing over cybersecurity and start focusing on growing your business in 2025. Check out Vanta and let us handle the tough stuff. Head to vanta.com/decloak to learn more. Because when it comes to your business, it's not just about keeping the lights on, it's about keeping everything secure. Thanks. Yeah, moving on, Andy, in terms of some of the challenges that you've been faced with within the industry, they could be personal or professional, just whatever you feel is relevant. So some of the challenges you've faced with in the industry
Yeah.
that
So
you, that you think that people might like. Yeah.
we're a fascinating industry. The security industry started really as sort of the band of misfits. If you look at where we came from, it was the people who didn't fit in the traditional IT structure. And while IT focused on core, we went and we did the stuff outside. Said, oh, like we'll go secure that e-commerce site in 1999 when e-commerce wasn't a word. And IT was like, no, what are you talking about? And somebody had to go volunteer. And one of the challenges that you run into when you're already, in that band of misfits is, inclusion, right? How do we make sure that everybody in that feels comfortable, using their voice to advocate for things? And, I'm now capstone of my career. Like I pretty much have a solid spot to stand on. And I still find it hard to point out to people like, hey, you just scheduled your conference on the Jewish high holidays.
Yeah.
Like, what are you doing in 2024 that you can't get that right? And then we're at Black Hat and there's the, brouhaha over, the literally the lampshade ladies, objectifying women by
Yeah.
covering their faces. Although I've heard from people who know those specific folks, they're like, this is the cushiest gig ever. Like, I don't have to make eye contact with people and I just get to stand there and like, this was fantastic. But we can't have these conversations because as soon as we start talking, it becomes this like battle of equities. It's like, well, is my position more important than yours? Um, and that's a challenge, because I just have this like I can't eat certain foods. Some of it is religious, some of it is dietary, and I go to conferences and I have conferences that I literally eat the beef sticks and granola bars that I brought with me, and that's it because there's no food for me to have. And I know this sounds little and petty, but here's the deal: is that every person in your team and in your organization has something like that they think, oh, this is little and petty, but they're wasting energy worrying about it. They know they're not going to be fed, so they know they're going to walk into the room and be asked to get coffee because they're the woman. So they know that they're going to be criticized for what they're wearing. Like whatever it's going to be, like they are wasting energy because nobody spent the time and little piece of energy to say, hey, it's okay. Like when you invite people for anything that has a meal, you should just say, Do you have any dietary restrictions I need to know about? That's it. Like, this costs you nothing on top of all your other prep. And starting with that sentence makes people feel welcome.
Yeah.
Because before you can get to professional inclusion, which is what everybody likes to talk about, like how do you make sure people are heard in every meeting? By the way, awful advice. I'll come to back to that in a moment. But before you get to professional inclusion, you've got to deal with personal inclusion.
Yeah.
On the professional inclusion, I'm a huge fan of making sure everybody who's in a meeting is producing value by being in the meeting.
Yeah.
But that A, doesn't mean they have to speak, and B, this amateurish, naive approach of, well, let's just make everybody say something. You might have a junior person in the room who doesn't have something that they're comfortable saying publicly. Like they've got a question that they don't know if it's stupid or not.
Yeah.
It is important that you give them a way to ask that question safely. But asking that question in front of a VP who their only experience with this person will be, this person just asked a stupid question. That's not professional inclusion. That's the exact opposite.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's about kind of dispelling misconceptions, and we all want an environment where, whether that's we attend a conference or we're engaging people that are maybe at a different level than us,
Yep.
and ensuring that you're not walking into something where people are going to be like, oh my god, not again. And there's so many things I think within cyber that just seem to repeat
Yeah.
constantly, and it's like, how long have we been talking about these things for? Like a decade. And it's like no one's willing to just kind of change them. But again, simple just statements have been like, you know, is this gonna have an impact on you, or do you want me to change something? Or again, back to your whole point about the dietary stuff, is like
Yeah.
it takes like less than 60 seconds to say it, you know?
It does. And it's about being prepared. And, I was having this conversation. I was watching America's Sweethearts on Netflix. It's the story of the Dallas Cowboy cheerleader 2023 squad. I'm a huge fan of like what goes into producing a cheer team.
Yeah, Andy, just talk me through your topic that you want to discuss that you feel needs relevance and cleaning up within the industry.
Yeah. So I think the thing I would love if everybody in the industry understood is that our goal is not perfection. We are not trying to eliminate risk. We are not the conscience of the companies. We are not the arbiters of risk. Our job is to help make tomorrow a little bit safer than today. And safer doesn't mean eliminating risk. It means making a wiser risk choice. And that sounds like a delicate and a nuance, but people take risk. That's sort of what we're born to do. If we did not take risk, we would never have evolved as far as we've gotten. So every time you eliminate a risk, or at least are perceived to eliminate risk, your business is going to take more risk. So your job isn't to hide risks from them, nor is it to convince them, oh, you can't do this. It's to say, given that you want to do this, what is the safer way? How do I make tomorrow a little safer than today? So you might want to, fix every problem that's out there. Pick one good thing and fix it.
Yeah.
They had somebody who would work for me, and that was her comment was, there is enough good work to be done that I don't care what you do. So people would say, well, give us your prioritized list. And it was this trap because so many security professionals want to have a perfectly prioritized list. And at the end of the day, look, you've got tier one risks. You've got a couple of things that are like, oh my God, these are big hairballs. We need to fix these. They're going to take a while. And then you have a bunch of tier two risks. They're like, oh, these are big. They're important, but like an individual team can deal with them. We would go to a team and we'd say, hey, we need you to fix one of these. And they're like, well, which one? And I'm like, well, you tell me which one you want to fix. Here's 4 problems. I would be happy if you fixed any of these. Which one is most approachable for you? Because getting work done is more important than spending time picking the best piece of work to do.
And how do you think, in your opinion, what's the best way to articulate that to get buy-in? Because sometimes people just do whatever they want to do, I guess. Yeah.
So I think you have to make the small argument to get buy-in.
So, yeah, Andy, just talk me through a topic that you wanted to discuss that needs relevance and clearing up within the industry.
I think we need to focus more on getting things done so that we are a little bit safer tomorrow and we're making wiser risk choices rather than trying to tilt at windmills to get perfect security. I see a lot of security professionals who complain about their business. And they're like, oh, these people just don't get security. I'm like, well, is it they don't get security or that you don't get business? Because at the end of the day, your business exists to take risks. That's literally why it exists. Is it's going to take risks in hope of getting profit. You can't eliminate risk. And anytime you walk in with this presumption that you can, what you do is you sort of set yourself up in tension with the business. So it's how do you get them to do good things and you don't really care which one? There is no shortage of problems to be solved, of good work to be done. You don't have to pick the right thing. Let the people who need to fix problems pick which problems to fix. Put the onus on them because right now, like think about the vulnerability remediation industry. How many products do we have to help us prioritize which vulnerability to fix first rather than having the conversation about like why isn't our engineering team just managing the life cycle of their software?
And then, like, I think that there seems to be a misconception that you need an MBA to translate business requirements and everything else. And is there any kind of advice you would give people to help with security aligning to the business needs and business goals? You know, or using security as a sellable asset to
Yep.
then kind of work in synergy. Yeah.
Yeah. So certainly an MBA helps if it's a good MBA. Don't get one just for the to have the piece of paper. What most helps is having done those jobs. Like my first job was as an accountant, so I can talk with finance folks all day. Nobody does double entry bookkeeping anymore. I grew up with pencil and paper and like an adding machine, and like the lessons I learned then aren't really relevant now. But I can talk about cash and accrual accounting, and I understand EBITDA, FCF, EPS, like everything that finance cares about when we start talking about software capitalization and R&D tax credits. I understand where they're coming from. And this is the most important thing is that when you want to ask someone to do something, the first thing you have to understand is why is what they're doing the right choice for them today? Because what I'm not trying to do is tell them they're making the wrong choice. I need to tell them that there's something they didn't see that should change how they make their choice. And so the
Same.
more you know, the better off you're going to be. And an MBA helps you a little bit, but honestly, go sit with your counterparty and say, like, how do you get measured on success? What does this mean? You would learn a lot from that.
It's perfect. I mean, you can get so far and a good understanding of that business area just by grabbing a coffee with someone,
Yep.
and getting to know them. Because I think when security walk into a room, sometimes I think people there is that fear element, or that just simply because there isn't enough education or enough of just translating their requirements
Yep.
into something that's tangible and actionable. And security. I mean, look how far it's come. We can automate so much. We can automate problems away.
Yep.
Whereas in before, I think traditional methods would have been like risk assessments, and things that are so monolithic and old. But yeah, yeah,
Right. But they check a box that we have to have that says we do this. I used to challenge the folks who do third party risk assessment. I once said to him, he was like, I need more headcount because it's taking like 1.5 FTEs to do the third party risk assessments on all of our vendors. And I'm like, and we're backlogged. Like it takes us like 6 weeks to do an assessment and the business wants to move faster. This was many, many years ago. And I said, what value are you providing? He's looking at me like, what do you mean? I said, well, if you're doing a risk assessment, then out of the end of that, like sometimes people should make a different choice. Either we don't you work with a vendor, or we implement different controls around the vendor, or the vendor changes what they're doing. Like, show me in the last year how many times you've had one of those three things happen. And he's like,
yeah,
I don't. Like, then why are we doing this? Like, if they can
yeah,
fill out the questionnaire and it's taking us this much time just to read the questionnaires, why don't we just say, did they fill out a questionnaire, yes or no? And you're done. Like, give them the questionnaire. If they can fill it out, they're clearly tall enough to pass your assessment, and your assessment isn't providing any value on top of that. So stop wasting time.
yeah. Absolutely sage advice. And then moving on to our last segment of the episode, Andy, is the one thing in cyber you think is BS and needs focus or needs to change. Yeah.
Oh, only one thing. This is always the fun of like, let's pick the one thing. And I think I touched on this earlier. There are security problems that are not ours to solve, and vulnerability remediation is one of them. I think so many security teams have wrapped themselves around the axle of we have to figure out which vulnerabilities need to be fixed in what order and prove it to the business. Vulnerability remediation is a product feature. It is not a security requirement. If you would like to take your product to market, this is a required feature in this day and age because you want to be able to say, oh, we meet whatever standard, whether it's SOC 2, whether it's FedRAMP, whatever. That makes it a product requirement, which means this is part of the product organization's responsibility is to declare we fix vulnerabilities according to the following SLA, and we're responsible for doing that. And the security team's only job is the oversight to make sure that that's a true statement. We need to get ourselves out of being operations staff trying to do vulnerability prioritization and then manage engineering teams to fix things. That has not worked for the last 30 years. It is not going to work for the next 30. So we need to pull out of that and say, product, if you want to go to market with a secure thing, this is what it takes. Show us how you're going to do it.
Like, controversial.
Yep.
I love it, but it's a truth that needs to be told. Personally, I was dying inside when you said that because I'm one of those people that have been guilty of kind of leading that charge.
Yep.
But it's not until someone actually says it to you and it makes it about a product feature because that's modernization, But
It is.
is there any advice on how you could then shift that paradigm or maybe kind of change that lens within an organization? Everyone's different. I get that. But
Yeah.
yeah, I'm interested. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is a hard problem. And I don't say this is like, oh, just do this one simple thing and it'll be fixed. At the end of the day, we have to get alignment along the business executive side that just says, we want to be compliant with the standard. Don't talk about security. This is not security. This is about compliance, right? This standard requires that we have an SLA. Okay, team, what is your SLA? The security team can help be, product managers and say, by the way, the standard that FedRAMP is going to require is this. So we recommend you achieve this. Okay, now how are you going to prove that you're doing it? Oh, we can help you implement controls. But our job is not to tell you, fix this vulnerability or that vulnerability. We do have a job to step in when there are massive crises, right? We are an intelligence function that says, oh, look, that vulnerability that just showed up, don't bother with the normal things, right? This is a crisis to go deal with an OpenSSL or Log4j vulnerability or anything in that category. But everything that's just routine hygiene, no, engineers are responsible for routine hygiene.
Nice. And it's almost like at the end of that, it's like the proverbial pin dropping. And I think there's so many people that are just waking up to that
Yep.
and maybe will probably still struggle with it. And some people are just stuck in that loop where they feel if they're not involved or they're not leading that charge, then no one else will in an organization. And I guess that's where I think us as a community needs to kind of really hammer that home and say, well, we can't fix everything. Back to
Yep.
your point, we're not the kind of operational support function where
And
we're a nanny state. Yeah.
right. Well, as nannies, a great thing you just said. Most importantly, we're not nannies, right? Our job is not to treat our peers like children and keep them from getting hurt.
Yeah.
It's sometimes to point out, you're going to get hurt if you do this. Oh, look, that just hurt. That's what a parent does,
Yeah.
right? There are things you don't let your child get hurt on. You don't let them shove their hand into an open flame, but you
Absolutely.
absolutely let them go play and skin their knees and have bad days because that's how they learn and stretch and grow. And organizations need to understand that, like, no, the security team isn't going to always save you. And when the auditor says, like, is this team patching stuff? It's not our job to lie to the auditor.
Yeah.
It's very much not our job to lie to the auditor. Like, we need to understand that if our enterprises are not fixing things, they need to understand the consequence is the auditor is going to know because we don't lie to auditors.
Yeah. And then, yeah, that's us concluded today, Andy, in terms of today's episode. Feel free if you wish to plug your book or any up and coming events that you may be speaking at. So yeah, back to you.
Yeah. So, we talked about the book, 1% Leadership. You can buy it anywhere you like to buy books. It's also on audio and electronic formats. I do have a it's about semi-weekly leadership newsletter, which is Duha1, Duhaone .substack.com. Duha is the name of my site consulting. And I speak at a bunch of events, so by the time this drops, I'm not sure what I'll have like right in the future. But hopefully you'll see me at RSA and or Black Hat, or wherever you like to be. And maybe I'll have a podcast soon.
Nice. And we look forward to it. And again, Andy, thank you so much for your time. For our audience, we had a couple of disconnects, let's just say, here in Scotland, and it's been an absolute aggravation. So after this podcast, Andy, I'm going to run out and shout at some people in my street. So anyway, but again, thank you so much for your time, Andy. Thank you again for your sound advice, and again, please continue to constantly contribute to our community because we need it. We need people like you. We need voices like you. And again, it's been an absolute privilege having you on the episode. And yeah, again, thank you so much. And to our audience, please follow Andy. Again, he's given lots of information in terms of where you can find him and what's happening next. And yeah, we'll plug various different links to the book and website as well. And again, everyone, please like, share, subscribe. And yeah, thanks again for your time, Andy.
Thanks for having me, Leo.